It's good to see you today. Hope you're doing well. Today is January 18th. Our reading today is from Genesis chapter 47 at verse 28 on through the end of Genesis itself. Actually, we're bringing Genesis to a close today. So to look at kind of a bird's eye view, as it is, chapter 47 verse 28, Jacob lived in the land of Egypt 17 years. Good number of years. So the length of Jacob's life was 147 years. And then this is as Israel, might notice that, when the time drew near that Israel must die. Keep harping on that. But he asks, let me lie with my fathers. Carry me out of Egypt and bury me in their burial place. Doesn't want to be left in Egypt. He had faith that, as the Lord said, Israel was going to come back to the promised land, and that's what was going to happen. Chapter 48, Jacob calls for the sons and blesses the sons in faith, is chapter 48. Chapter 49, pardon me, I should have said 49. I think chapter 48 is actually when he's blessing Joseph's sons. Chapter 49, it's calling the sons and then Jacob's passing. Then we have chapter 50, as talks about the days of his mourning. Verse 3, 40 days were required for him, for such of the days required for those who were embalmed, and the Egyptians mourned for him 70 days. You can tell what they thought of Joseph, his family, Joseph and his own father. And as Pharaoh telling Joseph, go up and bury your father as he made you swear, just makes you appreciate Pharaoh as you go through, and this Pharaoh as you go through and read what he did. And then you have the tail end, and this is where I wanted to focus more today. When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, perhaps Joseph will hate us and may actually repay us for all the evil which we did to him. I think we can understand their concern. Verse 16, so they sent messengers to Joseph, saying, before your father died, he commanded, saying, thus you shall say to Joseph, I beg you, please forgive the trespass of your brothers and their sin, for they did evil to you. Now please forgive the trespass of the servants of the God of your father. And Joseph wept when they spoke to him. Then his brothers also went and fell down before his face, and they said, behold, we are your servants. And Joseph said to them, do not be afraid, for am I in the place of God? But as for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, in order to bring it about as it is this day, to save many people alive. Now therefore do not be afraid, I will provide for you and your little ones. And he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. To think about the brothers, one thing that I think we should appreciate about them is that they recognized their sin. They recognized what they had done. They're scared, and we'll come back to that, but they recognized that they had done evil. Perhaps Joseph will hate us and may actually repay us for all the evil which we did to him. A lot of people in life, they never have that sort of self-awareness or self-reflection. They never care enough to recognize that they have done evil. And all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. And we need to recognize. And Joseph's brothers recognized that they had sinned. They actually do call it sin, as they say, thus you shall say to Joseph, please forgive the trespass of your brothers and their sin, for they did evil to you. But they recognized the evil that they had done. And we have to do the same. It takes self-awareness, self-reflection. I was actually thinking about a passage in James this past week, as it talks about looking into the perfect law of liberty, and not just being hearers but doers. That if we're just hearers, it's like a man looking at himself in a mirror and then immediately forgetting what kind of man he is, something along those lines. sometimes when we are not living correctly, we lose our self-awareness, and sometimes we don't do what the brothers did. We don't recognize our own sin, and we have to recognize our own sin. This is why self-examination is so important. It took years for the brothers to say this. They say it. They say it. And Joseph says what he says. We'll come back to that here in a moment. They humbled themselves as well, though. Actually, before that, let's look back at the passage. They were afraid. And I wanted to mention that, because they were afraid. They saw their father was dead. They said, perhaps Joseph will hate us. And they're just fearful. Joseph wept when they spoke to him, verse 17. Verse 19, Joseph said to them, do not be afraid, for I am in the place of God. They're afraid. And that's how, as we come to the Lord, and the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. But there's different kinds of fear. But one type of fear that I think is healthy is, in order for us to depend wholly upon the Lord's grace, as we recognize that we have sinned, we know what we deserve. What did Joseph's brothers deserve? Should they have been afraid? Yes. When they say, perhaps he will actually, when they see Jacob is gone, and they've been there for years at this point. What did we read today or yesterday? That Jacob, they had been there for more than a decade. But now that Jacob's gone, perhaps Joseph will hate us. They have been there longer than a decade. And still they're living in fear. And perhaps that's another point that we need to make. How long had they really been afraid? How long had they been living with this guilt that they had sold their brother? They'd been living with it for years, decades. They knew they had done wickedness. They knew they had done evil. And they're afraid. Because now as Jacob has passed away, they know that they are at Joseph's. Whatever Joseph wants to do, there's nothing they can do to stop it. And they're afraid. They know what they deserve. And when we are confronted with our own sins, it's natural to be afraid, because we know what we deserve. So the men, the brothers, what they do, they humble themselves. And I wanted you to see in verse 16, they sent messengers, they sent to Joseph, saying, before your father died, all that rigmarole. Okay? By the way, Jacob didn't do that, but regardless. They sent to Joseph. But then in verse 18, then his brothers also went and fell down before his face. And they said, behold, we are your servants. Maybe they knew the message that they wanted passed on. Maybe they knew that that was not enough. Maybe they knew that Joseph knew that Jacob had not said that. Whatever the case may be, his brothers also come, and they fall down on their face before Joseph, and they said, behold, we are your servants. And they humbled themselves, and that's all they could do. When the prodigal son comes back to the father, right, and the father embraces him, remember what the prodigal son said he was going to say? I have sinned in God's eyes and in your eyes, before heaven and in your eyes. No longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants. Joseph's brothers say, behold, we are your servants. All they can do is plead. They fall down on their face and they say, we are your servants. And they make their plea. They pled. Actually, they don't even plea. They just say what they say. Behold, we are your servants. And then we see the grace of Joseph. Do not be afraid, verse 21. I will provide for you and your little ones. And he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. He knew they meant evil against him, but he recognized God's hand in it all, in verse 20. And I'm sure that took him a long time to accept that. But in verse 21, he comforts them and he speaks kindly to them. Did they deserve it? Not in the least. And that's why it's called grace. As we come to the Lord and we recognize our sin, and we're afraid, but we humble ourselves and we say, we are your servants. And the Lord speaks kindly to us, and he comforts us. And it's gracious, and we're thankful. And that brings Genesis to a close. We know what's coming up with Exodus, but that's for another study, if that's where we're headed next. But I hope this short study, this short look into God's Word has been beneficial for you. I hope you have a good day. I appreciate you joining us as we go through the Bible day by day. Hope your day goes well, and we'll see you tomorrow. Thanks for being with us.